You can subscribe to The Leader through your podcast provider, and please do share us with your friends so everyone can get the Evening Standard's news, analysis and commentary every day at 4 p.m. Now, from the Evening Standard in London, this is The Leader.
Evening Standard, it's your Evening Standard.
Hi, I'm David Marsland. How do you stop a pandemic?
Two of our elite hospitals, St Thomas's in Lambeth and the Royal Free in Hampstead, they are on standby just now to be the receiving centres should any of the patients suspected to have coronavirus have it actually diagnosed.
The Evening Standard's health editor, Ross Lydall, explains what happens if coronavirus is found in the UK. Also,
they spend a lot of time trying to track down people who are suspects in serious offences, using databases compiled from their custody suite images will help them to speed up that process.
Martin Bentham on his exclusive story, facial recognition cameras are to be deployed across London. And
Tony Blair at one table, Ivanka Trump popped by.
The other side of Davos, Anne McElvoy reveals the fun to be had at an economic forum, as well as news on a US-China trade deal. Taken from the Evening Standard's editorial column, this is The Leader. For the whole thing, pick up the newspaper or head to standard.co.uk/comment. In a moment, Ross Lydall on coronavirus. The streets are being sprayed in Wuhan, China, where the mysterious coronavirus first emerged. Many of the city's 11 million people wear masks over their faces outside, and doctors are urging everyone to wash their hands frequently. Hospitals there have used the Chinese equivalent of Twitter, Weibo, to make appeals for supplies. 11 cities and 4 towns in the Hubei province are on a travel lockdown. That's 35 million people forbidden from leaving. Disneyland in Shanghai has been shut down to stop the spread. Will any of this work? Our health editor Ross Lydall's covering the story. And Ross, you were at People's Question Time, where the London Mayor usually answers concerns about things like crime and housing. But coronavirus was on the agenda there too, wasn't it? People are quite concerned about this.
Yes, last night, maybe halfway through the event, it's a 2-hour event, it was in Wood Green, and a student stood up. He appeared to be of sort of Chinese descent, and he asked the mayor, is London prepared for coronavirus? What should I do? Sadiq replied that there is no reason to be alarmed. He revealed actually he'd been in contact with Public Health England yesterday, and he was assured at that time, we should say, that there were no cases in London. But as we speak just now, there are no cases in London or in England. That may change. But Sadiq did reveal that he was essentially trying to be on top of this.
We'll keep an eye on this. If anybody, the advice is if anybody thinks they've got symptoms, it's best to stay at home. Don't go to the GP practice or go to the hospital. And what Public Health England will do is make this available, this information on the radio and the TV, so people are aware. There's no reason to be alarmed.
The reason for this is that he will host on Sunday London's annual Trafalgar Square celebration for Chinese New Year. But he said, we will keep an eye on what happens in Wuhan to make sure we are ready if, God forbid, it comes to this country.
So London currently has the all clear, but if this virus spreads, the city will play a major role in containing and treating it.
That's right. Two of our elite hospitals, St Thomas's in Lambeth and the Royal Free in Hampstead, they are on standby just now to be the receiving centres should any of the patients suspected to have coronavirus have it actually diagnosed. So those patients would be transferred either from home or from an outlying hospital such as Hillingdon to the two guys in St Thomas's in the first instance, with the Royal Free on standby as a backup centre. 2 or 3 years ago, we remember the Ebola outbreak, and that was when the Royal Free really rose to international prominence when it saved the life of several NHS workers who had contracted Ebola in Sierra Leone. So London has some very clever people who are able to deal with infections such as this.
So we know the situation here through Public Health England. Internationally, the World Health Organization was expected to declare this as an emergency. They haven't done so yet. What's the hesitation?
Well, they've taken 2 meetings now to think very carefully about this. By declaring a sort of emergency of sort of global concern, it would put this on a par with Zika and Ebola, which was twice declared of such magnitude, and would essentially speed help to China. But also the key point would mean that other countries where cases emerge, they would have a duty to share information about these patients with all other health organisations across the world, so that everybody would know more about the strain of coronavirus and how infectious it is, how many other people had been infected by the person who was infected, and so on.
And this is what the chairman of the organisation's emergency committee, Professor Didier Howson, was talking about last night.
It is too early because of limited number of cases abroad, and also considering the efforts which are presently made by Chinese authorities in order to try to contain the disease.
So that hasn't happened yet. But what's happened today as well is because UK experts are largely divided on whether this is a good idea or not. And one of the most prominent, Professor Peter Piot, who is from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, now he is a world figure in infectious diseases. He was the man who discovered Ebola back in the 1970s in Africa. He's saying the outbreak is currently at a critical point, or a critical phase, he said. And basically what he said is that there cannot be any complacency as to the need for global action, which essentially the WHO declaration would have led to. But he said the good news is that so far it appears this virus may have a lower mortality rate than SARS, which of course killed thousands, or almost 1,000 20 years or so ago, and infected many thousands. And there is a diagnostic test for the disease in the UK, so we can work out quite quickly if somebody has it or not. So, but he says basically beware, because there's still a risk of a potential pandemic in one country, if not more.
Next.
Shopping centres where people go with knives, for example. Some of those high-profile areas might be obvious targets for the Met to use this technology.
Martin Bentham on the facial recognition cameras being deployed across London. Facial recognition cameras are being deployed across London for the first time. They'll be looking for people on watch lists, like those suspected of violent crime. It follows trials in parts of the city, but the move's raising concerns among privacy campaigners. Our editorial column, though, says it's the right decision.
Fingerprinting, CCTV cameras and DNA testing were all controversial when they came in. Now they are vital police tools. We predict that the same will soon be true of facial recognition technology. At a time when knife crime levels have just hit a record high, it's an essential step which, deployed carefully, will make our streets safer. Some will ask about privacy. It's a fair concern, but one that can be answered. The law is clear, and rules are in place to stop it being abused. Data is deleted quickly, and the technology works, as anyone who has used it on a new smartphone knows. The system won't be used to track people's movements. Instead, it will detect someone on a police watch list, and trials in London and South Wales last year showed it would identify them up to 90% of the time. Given that, it would be absurd to hold back from deploying it.
Our Home Affairs editor, Martin Bentham, broke the story, which you can read on the front page of the Evening Standard. Martin, why do the police want to use this technology?
Simply because they spend a lot of time trying to track down people who are suspects in serious offences, and clearly they hope that having facial recognition, using databases compiled from their custody suite images, will help them to speed up that process and save a lot of police time, in effect, and also protect the public by having people who are potentially problematic off the streets more quickly.
So how does it work?
Basically what they will do is to use their intelligence about who they need, who they're looking for, compile databases of those type of people for specific operations in particular areas which they'll work out on the basis of where they think particular types of suspects might be. You can imagine shopping centres where people go with knives, for example, to meet other people. Sometimes there's well-known problems sometimes with that happening in London. So some of those high-profile areas might be obvious targets for the Met to use this technology. They will set up a camera, having worked out who they're looking for and where they might be, and then in effect use it to trigger alerts for people who are passing by, and then an officer will look at the resulting image, the resulting match, to check that they're satisfied that that is actually the person they're looking for, and then go and talk to them and potentially arrest them if they need to.
Its advantages are obvious, but there are a lot of groups who are deeply concerned about this, the idea of a surveillance state. There's one organisation that said it's like taking somebody's DNA without their permission. What's the police response to that?
Well, I think the police say, and clearly there are regulators that look at this, including the Information Commissioner's Office, and the High Court itself has had a test case before it about whether such technology in previous trials, which there have been in South Wales and in the Met itself, comply with data protection laws, equality laws, and other legislation. And they have concluded that the way that it's been applied so far, and that clearly the Met will seek to follow this in future, is sufficiently proportionate to the task in hand to alleviate concerns of the sort that you're talking about. For example, the images aren't retained, it's not linked into all sorts of other technologies, so it's a snapshot use of it in a sense that as it stands under the current system, designed for a specific purpose, in this case, generally speaking, to target serious offenders. It also actually will be used potentially for locating, for example, missing children and other vulnerable adults who've gone missing. So that's a practical use of it, which is perhaps less obvious, but actually can save an awful lot of police time. There are quite a lot of reports of people having missing children, and again, those things can be quite time-consuming for the police.
And with so much concern about violent crime, which is a really big issue in the upcoming mayoral election, this is the kind of tool that, if used properly, could be really effective.
Well, of course, if it's not just a time-saving device, as I say, although obviously if they save time, they've got more time to go and do other things and proactively pursue other offenders and so on. But also the crucial thing is that if you've got a serial mugger, for example, the swifter you are able to take them off the streets, have them dealt with for the offences which you believe they've committed, the better it is. Same with serial knife carriers. It just is obviously sensible for the police to be able to, if they can, to be able to catch those people as quickly as they can, rather than having to spend a lot of time chasing around London in the hope that they might come across them.
Now, the World Economic Forum at Davos has wrapped, and the delegates are getting their planes out of Switzerland safe in the knowledge that their flights have been carbon offset. The senior editor of The Economist and standard columnist Anne McElvoy is doing her packing after spending the week there, but she's joining me now on a slightly shaky FaceTime line, which I hope holds. And this year, Greta Thunberg and Donald Trump's dueling speeches dominated the headlines when they appeared on Monday. But as people are heading home now, is that what they're still talking about?
Of course, this week has not just been about climate change. Other subjects have really been China trade deal. Is it coming or going, to put it in simple terms? There had been hopes, and I heard this from sources high up in the World Economic Forum who run Davos. They were really hoping to get a breakthrough. There was an even plan, I think, for there to be some form of announcement that things were moving on much faster. Now, there's an early stage trade announcement that's sort of come out of the White House and Beijing, but it's nowhere near what you could call a trade deal. So the other thing that's changed is if you look around this year, there's a sprinkling of senior Chinese delegates. The year when President Xi was here, you couldn't move for Chinese banks, Chinese administrators, Chinese support staff. So I think you can kind of tell whether something is happening or not.
And it can't all be about economics and terrible climate disasters. There must be some fun at Davos.
Yes, I am quite happy to confess on your show that there is fun at Davos. We do sit around late at night in huddles in quite nice little bars with a big glass of Swiss wine. So the glitz and glamour, the funny thing about it is it's a mix. You can be at a table, go out to somewhere, and you could see Tony Blair at one table. Ivanka Trump popped by, and there was a bit of a frisson in the room, and who should go and talk to her and who didn't want to. Priyanka Chopra Jonas, the great Bollywood star, Natalia Vodianova, the Russian supermodel. So it's quite an interesting mix that you can turn a corner and be talking to the head of Bank of America 1 minute, and you turn around and there's a large pair of stilettos appears among the snow boots. And look there, it's a celebrity A-lister. That's part of the mix of the place and what adds to the fun as well as the hard work for the week.
And that's The Leader. Keep up to date with our audio news bulletins. They're available every weekday through your smart speaker. Just ask for the news from the Evening Standard. This podcast is back on Monday at 4. It's Brexit week.